Aloha, I'm Leslie Tagorda, Aquarius boss woman, brand astrologer, and designer. Not long ago, I was an unseen business owner playing small. Then, using my astrology chart, I uncovered the luminary I was meant to be. Now I help entrepreneurs like you use astrology in practical ways to crystallize your brand visibility for brilliance, impact, and reach. We are currently in a huge global pivot, and it's your time to be a leader, your time to show up for your community and contribute your magic in the world. I believe you are here to shine brightly online like the luminary you are meant to be. Hey everybody, it's Leslie Tagorda, your brand navigator, designer, and astrologer, here today, a little bit frazzled, but still here. I really wanted to come on today, even though my assistant was like, "Are you sure you don't want to skip a week?" And I was like, "No, I committed to every week. I have to show up." But the reason why he was suggesting that maybe we skip this week is because we've been so freaking busy delivering our 4-day challenge, How to Read Your Natal Chart for Business. Let me just say that this was exceeded all of my expectations in terms of how much people loved this. I had no idea that it was going to be so successful. So I had over about 420 people sign up for this 4-day challenge from all over the world. I got to meet amazing people from New Zealand, from the UK, from Ireland, and of course, right here in the United States. And it just warms my heart that so many people not only signed up, but showed up, did the work, and commented all throughout the challenge. So each day I was doing little Q&As, and I'm recording this right before I give the live masterclass, How to Illuminate Your Brand Using Astrology. I call myself a brand navigator. I mentioned it before. I like to call myself a brand navigator, but sometimes people don't quite understand. So sometimes I'll just say that I'm a brand astrologer and designer. But I really love calling myself a navigator because you are the captain of the ship. And I help you discern where you want to go and how you're going to get there using astrology. And teaching you how to read your natal chart is just one of my gifts. I love teaching and I love astrology. So this really comes naturally to me. So I didn't want to skip this week because this week is huge with so many planets putting on the brakes and going backwards from our perspective on Earth. I love talking about retrogrades and I love looking at the power of retrogrades. Instead of freaking out, if we understand the power of a retrograde and the work that we're supposed to integrate and refine and relearn in our businesses, we can really use these powers of the retrograde season to grow our businesses in wise ways, right? We can't always be moving forward and growing and moving and forward and growing, but sometimes moving forward means reflecting, reinventing, refining, and redoing work that we're already meant to bring into the world. So in my challenge, when I was doing a Q&A, I did a talk on all of the planets that are going retrograde this coming week. We have a huge retrograde season. Pluto is already in retrograde, but it'll be joining, the planets that'll be joining retrograde are Venus and Jupiter and Saturn. So mid next week, we'll have all of these planets going retrograde, and we can be expecting this huge retrograde season all the way to September. And just when these planets start to go forward again, then they're going to be joined by Mars and Uranus. And then, of course, we have a couple of Mercury retrogrades thrown in there. So, you know what? 2020 is going to be a huge year for relearning all of our life's lessons. And you didn't need me to tell you that. You already know. So please enjoy this episode and excuse kind of the back and forthness of it. Remember, I was doing this live on a Facebook Live in my group, The Savvy Luminary, for our challenge, How to Read Your Natal Chart for your business.
Earlier, you might have heard Rita talk about her natal Mercury retrograde. I'm sure all of you guys know what Mercury retrogrades are because everybody always talks about Mercury retrogrades, like back up your tech, all of these things. And it's gotten to the point where people like really fear retrogrades. And I am here, of course, to change the judgment around retrogrades and why people should not freak the F out when they have retrogrades in their chart or when retrograde seasons are coming up. Because next week we have some huge retrogrades coming on. Okay, so Pluto is already in retrograde, but for those really outer planets, we talked about Pluto being a generational planet that, affects us collectively unless it's like on our rising sign or something like that. Pluto, from our perspective on here on Earth, because it's so far out, looks like it's going retrograde for like half the year. So I know people talk about it, but we're not going to really feel Pluto retrogrades that much. It's in retrograde right now. But next week, holy smokes, hold your horses because we have three other planets going retrograde next week. Oh yes, Rita, you have Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and the North Node in retrograde. So most of us, like the North nodes, like the true nodes, we talked about the North Node and the South Node, those nodes are like almost always going in retrograde. That's just the natural progression. So just like if you have a retrograde, that's like everybody has the retrograde. When you have the personal planets in your natal chart going retrograde, this just means that you see things and experience things and process things a little bit differently. So the personal planets, like if we go back to day one training, right? The personal planets, of course, being Mercury, Venus, and Mars, right? Those are the planets that are closest to the Earth. We call them the personal planets because they zip around. And those planets go retrograde quite often. And because they are personal planets, we feel them, right? So Mercury, because it goes so fast, Mercury retrogrades happen 3 times a year. And actually just the other day, I think what was the day? On May 4th. Oh yeah, May 4th. May the 4th be with you. On May 4th, on Monday, the sun was conjunct Mercury, and that's called a combust. And when the sun is conjunct Mercury, that means it's in the halfway point between when Mercury is going to go retrograde again. But you can take a little breath because Mercury is not going to go retrograde again until June 18th. So we have, a little more than a month before Mercury goes retrograde again, so you can get your systems backed up and things like that. But when you have Mercury retrograde in your chart, it just means that you process information differently. And Rita, you and I talked about that a little bit last week. So let's talk about the retrogrades that are coming up for us, all that happen next week. So next week on May 13th, Venus, the planet of love and connection, that planet is going retrograde on May 13th. So a close planet of ours. So write that down, May 13th through June 25th, Venus goes retrograde. So Venus rules Taurus and Libra, right? And so we talked about Venus is our love to connect, our love to create beauty and create peace, and also money, right? It rules Taurus because it provides for us. And so when we have Venus going retrograde, instead of the normal process of Venus going first into Taurus and then into Libra, meaning, okay, we create peace, we create worthiness, we create prosperity for ourselves. And then Venus wants to connect, right? It wants to be popular. It wants to be liked. It wants to be loved. So now when Venus goes retrograde, the opposite is true. We find our worth through others, right? So all of this stuff that we've been talking about, like, you need to find your worth in yourself and believe in yourself and yada, 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 right? We've all heard that. Like, you're never going to be able to find love until you love yourself, right? Well, when Venus is retrograde, and if you have Venus retrograde in your natal chart, the opposite is true. right? Where you really do find your worthiness as expressed through others. Okay, because it's backwards. There's nothing to fear. It's just understanding that you have there. I think that it's really actually kind of beautiful. And so when we think about the aspects of Venus, like the qualities of Venus to be connected and to be flirty and to be fun and to socialize, right? When Venus goes retrograde in Gemini, how we're going to be doing this is online, right? Because we're mostly in lockdown throughout the whole world. There are places in this world where people are starting to come out of lockdown, but hey, when we're out in public, we have to cover our appearances, right? So expect those kinds of things. Now, in your business, maybe you might have a client that has kind of like ghosted, right? You might hear them coming back and saying, hey, Janine, I need your help again. Hey, Leslie, can you fix that website that I forgot to pay you for? Right? So these are the kinds of things you can expect during a Venus retrograde, are these old connections in Gemini coming back. Possibly also relationships that just no longer serve you coming to an end, right? So those are the concepts for the Venus retrograde that's happening on May 13th and will happen through June 25th. Now, Venus goes retrograde, I think once every 13 months or so. Let me get back to you on the exactness of that. On May 11th, Saturn goes retrograde, and it's going to be there until September 29th. Oh my goodness. When Saturn goes retrograde. So let's talk about this. So Saturn is currently in Aquarius. It's like Saturn takes like 28 years to go around the zodiac. So it doesn't move that quickly. And then earlier in the year, if I don't know if you've been following me back in January or you've been following other astrologers back in January, but if you remember, this whole paradigm shift happened when Saturn met up with Pluto back in January of 2020. And this is like a once in like a lifetime kind of conjunction when these two planets meet. And then it was in Capricorn. So Saturn is going to go back from in Aquarius, from it's only made it like barely into 2 degrees of Aquarius before now it's going back into Capricorn, and back into September, it's going directly to the degree that it connected with Pluto back in January, so 25 degrees of Scorpio. So let's just say that for 2020, the Capricorn concept and the Saturn concept of Capricorn is about processes and achieving our goals and sustainability, and Saturn is about restrictions, right? And when we have this big conjunction, this is when things start to come down. The house of cards are coming down. So when Saturn is going retrograde, and just like Pluto, from our perspective here on Earth, Saturn looks like it's going backwards for half of the year. So if you have this natally, it's fine. It's a collective planet. So where Pluto is a generational planet, Saturn is a collective planet. It's not as close as a personal planet, but we're still going to feel this sense of restriction. Saturn, we talked about yesterday as looking at Saturn as not as the strict grandfather. The strict grandfather doesn't necessarily, he's telling us not to go on the other side of the fence because he doesn't want us to have a good time. No, Saturn is telling us not to go beyond the fence because it's not sustainable out there. Because if you go out there, then you have to bring all your food, you have to bring all your water, right? So Saturn as the strict grandpa is just really trying to help us be within our means. So we're going to have from now until September, when Saturn goes direct, to really reintegrate what our current abilities, our current boundaries are, and really get used to that. Okay, so if you've been feeling really claustrophobic with this lockdown, or if you've been feeling like really tight with the finances, this is just an opportunity to reintegrate the new modes of sustainability that you're going to need in your business. So maybe this is a time to spend more wisely, right? It doesn't mean to stop spending. We all have to spend. We all have to grow. But now when we grow, how are we going to be doing this sustainably? And sustainably can just mean like sustainability of like resources, sustainability of time. I know this is something that I need to work with myself, with the sustainability of time. So yes, Saturn in retrograde. So on May 14th next week, we have Jupiter, the planet of expansion, and that one is going also retrograde. Holy smokes, these four planets going retrograde all at the same time. So for all of you who are thinking about doing something big or launching something into the world, the time to do it is, the best time to do it is on Friday, tomorrow. So whatever you need to do to get things in a row, do your big things tomorrow, because we're not really going to have a good opportunity to release new things until like the fall, right? If we're really being mindful of the cosmic energies. What we have right now, except for Pluto, everything is going direct. And then next week, things are going backwards. So make your big decisions now. So when Jupiter goes retrograde, pretty much Jupiter, while we also had a Jupiter Pluto conjunction recently, because Jupiter takes about 12 years to go through the zodiac, Jupiter is pretty much going to be tapping and dancing on Pluto this entire year as it goes retrograde. So when earlier, if you've been following me and talking about Pluto in terms of like transformation, it can also be like the fear of transformation, right? We have to kind of frame what Pluto means, because whatever Jupiter touches, it expands, whether it's good, whether it's bad. And we know that good and bad are just judgments, right? This is going to bring to light excessiveness is a power. It's also going to be able to expand our spiritual transformation. So I know a lot of you had, when you signed up for this challenge, you were really attracted to it because you felt a spiritual call. Right? Like, I know I've been feeling it. I've been feeling the need to speak up more and share my work more and bring it to more people, because I know that I have this spiritual insight into how to heal businesses. And so however you guys use spirituality in your business, whether it's inherently like you sell a spiritual service, or you have it more under the covers where you use spirit to guide you in making decisions for a more traditional business, this idea of spiritual expansiveness and transformation is really going to come into the fore while Jupiter is retrograde. And again, Jupiter is going to be retrograde also through September 12th. So Jupiter retrograde from May 14th through September 12th. So Janine, yes. So I'm guessing you've been hearing the call for bringing spiritual transformation. I know I have. Jupiter is retrograde in your first house. Okay, so Sarah, that's beautiful, because again, if you heard earlier, any planets that you have in the first house just really add to your personality. So I'm guessing you have a very expansive personality, right? That you love to share your ideas. When you have Jupiter in this place of brand personality, you just have the power to be bold, right? So just thinking of your brand on steroids, so to say. So I went through Venus, I went through Saturn, I went through Jupiter, we already went through Pluto. So phew, we have a lot of that coming up for us all next week. So whatever you can do, lesson learned. Do what you need to do to get your wheels in motion now, because this retrograde time is going to be a time for refinement, for polishing up. So there's so many productive things that you can do during retrograde season. So instead of bringing things new into the world during a retrograde season, it's redoing, refining, reflecting, anything that you can add a to, right? So looking back at your old work and seeing like, hey, this was really popular. Maybe I can improve this and re-release it. Yeah, if you have something that you've already launched and you need to relaunch it during a retrograde, that's fine. You just don't want to start anything new when there's these big retrogrades going into the world. So, we're in it and again until mid-September when things start to go direct. And then again, there's 3 Mercury retrogrades in a year. So reframing this idea of retrogrades and looking at the power that they have to redo and refine and reinvent things. Right? That's what retrogrades are for. So this is why I love astrology so much, because it can give us so much insight as to what we need to do in our businesses and when we need to do things in our business.
That's all I have for this week. Of course, you are invited to join us and continue the conversation in my free Facebook group, The Savvy Luminary. And if you love this podcast, please share it with your business besties and give us a rating and review on iTunes. This helps this podcast go further out into the world. Have a lovely week, everybody.
Mahalo for listening to this brand new podcast. If you enjoyed learning about astrology for entrepreneurs, help me spread the word by sharing this podcast with your business besties, and hop over to The Savvy Luminary for links to episode notes and our free Facebook community where you can send me questions about astrology or branding, as well as connect with other like-minded businesses.